The wind over the frozen borderlands didn't just howl, it cut. It sliced through steel, bone, and silence like the sky itself had turned hostile. Snow drifted across the abandoned industrial zone in thick waves, swallowing the ruins of old factories, rusted towers, and shattered concrete roads. Somewhere beneath that white chaos, a war was already waiting. Inside a hidden forward operations base on the edge of NATO-controlled territory, the atmosphere was nothing like the storm outside. Fluorescent lights hummed softly. Tactical screens blinked with shifting maps and satellite feeds. Soldiers moved quickly but quietly, as if even their footsteps might disturb fate. At the center of it all stood Captain Alina Carter, 28 years old, U.S. Army Special Operations, known for completing missions others didn't even survive planning. But tonight, even she wasn't comfortable. Her eyes stayed locked on the holographic map projected in front of her. A red zone marked deep inside Russian-controlled territory. The objective was highlighted in cold, clinical blue. Extraction High-Value Asset Code Name, Oracle. Behind her, Commander Hayes crossed his arms. "No complications," he said firmly. "You go in, retrieve the asset, and return. No engagement unless absolutely necessary." Alina didn't turn around. "That's not how this area works," she replied quietly. Hayes sighed. "It's an abandoned zone, old industrial grid, no confirmed heavy presence." That made Alina finally look at him. "Confirmed by who?" she asked. A pause. No answer. That silence told her everything. Warning: a mission that feels wrong. Alina stepped closer to the map. Satellite overlays showed scattered heat signatures, but something about them felt inconsistent. Flickering, shifting, almost artificial. She zoomed in. The data jittered for half a second before stabilizing. Her eyes narrowed. "Signal interference," she asked the tech operator. "Possible atmospheric distortion," he replied. Alina shook her head immediately. "No, that's not atmospheric." She had seen battlefield jamming before. This wasn't random noise. This was structured disruption, someone actively controlling what they could and couldn't see. She turned toward Hayes again. "Are we being jammed?" He hesitated just long enough. "That's impossible to confirm." That answer confirmed everything for her. If command couldn't confirm it, they didn't want to. Jigsaw the weight of unsaid truths. Alina walked away from the map, tightening her gloves. Around her, her team prepared silently. 6 operators. Highly trained. Trusted. But trust didn't mean survival. She looked at them one by one. Sergeant Miller, calm, experienced. Private Lewis, young, fast, nervous energy. Specialist Rammers, communications expert. 2 others equally skilled, equally unaware of what might be coming. They were ready for a clean mission. But Alina had learned something over the years. Backhand index pointing right clean missions don't exist near Russian-controlled borders. She adjusted her rifle sling. "If something goes wrong," she said suddenly, "you don't wait for command, you move." Miller raised an eyebrow. "You expecting trouble, Captain?" Alina didn't answer immediately. Because trouble wasn't the word she wanted. Finally she said, "I expect reality." Small the flight into the unknown. 2 hours later, the transport aircraft cut through the storm like a ghost. No lights. No markings. Just the low vibration of engines and the quiet tension of soldiers sitting shoulder to shoulder in the dark. Alina sat near the ramp, staring at the floor. Outside, the sky was a moving wall of snow and cloud. Inside, silence was heavier than sound. Private Lewis leaned slightly toward her. "Captain, you think this is just another extraction?" Alina didn't look at him. "No," she said. That single word ended the conversation. Because when Alina Carter said no, it usually meant someone was about to die. Green light. The aircraft slowed. A voice came through the intercom. Drop zone in 30 seconds. Alina stood up. Her squad followed. Harness checks, weapon checks, final confirmations. Everything mechanical, everything practiced. But Alina's instincts were screaming now. Something was off. Not slightly. Completely. She approached the ramp. The snowstorm below looked endless. No lights. No movement. No signs of life. But that was the problem. No battlefield in this region was ever empty. Warning the moment before everything breaks. 10 seconds, the pilot announced. Alina's hand tightened on her strap. She scanned the darkness one last time. And then she saw it. For half a second. A faint reflection. Metal. Movement. Down below. Not wildlife. Not wind. Human. Her eyes narrowed sharply. Wait, she started. Geo, the voice barked. The ramp dropped. Cold air exploded into the cabin. Before she could fully react, they jumped, one by one, into the storm, into the silence, into something none of them could yet see. Alina was the last, and as she stepped off the edge into the freezing void, a final thought crossed her mind. Backhand index pointing right, this was not a rescue mission. It was something else entirely. Something already waiting below. Snowflake, the landing that changed everything. Her parachute snapped open violently. Wind tore at her body as she descended through layers of snow and darkness. Below her, ruins. Abandoned structures. Broken steel skeletons of factories. And then, she saw it again. Clearer this time. Footprints in the snow. Fresh. Too fresh. Alina's grip tightened. No, she whispered. But it was already too late. Because as she drifted closer to the ground, red dots flickered in the darkness below. 1. Then 5. Then dozens. Laser sights. Aimed upward. Waiting. Not reacting. Waiting. And in that frozen silence before impact, Alina Carter finally understood. Backhand index pointing, right, they hadn't entered enemy territory. They had been allowed in. The moment Alina Carter hit the ground, the world didn't feel like it landed with her. It exploded. Snow burst upward as she rolled across the frozen terrain, her parachute dragging behind her like a dying shadow. She cut it instantly with a survival blade and dove behind a half-collapsed concrete barrier. Around her, the night was no longer silent. It was awake. Gunfire cracked through the storm like breaking glass. Ratatatatat. Bullets shredded metal beams nearby, sparking against frozen steel. Somewhere in the chaos, a voice shouted through comms. Contact, multiple DIRECTONS. Alina didn't respond immediately. Her eyes were already moving. Counting. Analyzing. Surviving. Red circle, a drop that was already watched. Her squad was landing in pieces across the zone. She could hear them before she could see them. Shouts cut short, radios breaking, boots hitting snow too fast. Then, an explosion lit the left side of the ruins. Boom! A shockwave rolled across the ground. One of her soldiers was thrown backward into a collapsed wall. Alina moved instantly. Regroup on me, she ordered into the radio. Static answered. Not silence. Worse, interference. Someone was jamming them again. Command, we're taking fire. Sergeant Miller's voice broke through for a second. Then distortion swallowed him. Alina clenched her jaw. "This isn't random fire," she muttered. "This is coordinated." She peeked over the barrier and saw it, warning the shape of a trap. Through the snowfall, shadows moved between the ruins. Not chaotic movement. Controlled. Spaced. Professional. Elena zoomed her optic sight. 3 elevated positions. 2 flank routes. 1 central choke point. Her expression hardened. "This is a kill box," she whispered. A voice crackled through an unknown channel, calm, almost amused. "Captain Carter, welcome to the zone." Elena froze for half a second. Not because of fear. Because of recognition. Someone was speaking directly to her. That meant this wasn't just a mission gone wrong. It was designed. Fire first collapse of the team. A scream cut through the wind. "Medic, I'm hit." "Private Lewis." Elena spun. She saw him behind a broken support beam, clutching his side, blood dark against white snow. But before she could move, snap, boom. Another explosion detonated near their position. Shrapnel tore through metal. Lewis disappeared behind smoke. Elena fired instantly, 3 controlled shots into the fog. 1 target dropped. Then another. But more kept moving. Always more. "They're pushing in," Miller shouted somewhere to her right. "Fall back to the east structure," Elena ordered. No hesitation. No panic. Only execution. Brain, the enemy was not local. As she moved between cover points, Elena finally got a clearer look at the attackers. Their gear wasn't standard Russian patrol equipment. It was layered. Advanced. Specialized winter combat rigs with optical masks and silent movement systems. Elite units. Not border guards. Not militia. Something else. "Elena, we're pinned," Ramir's voice came through weakly. "Where are you?" she demanded. "Second warehouse, north edge." Then static swallowed him. Elena's grip tightened. This was getting worse by the second. Because now she understood. Backhand index pointing, right, they weren't just being ambushed. They were being contained. Snowflake, the snow becomes a battlefield. Wind howled through broken steel frames as visibility dropped even further. Snow thickened. Everything became ghost-like, shapes appearing and vanishing within seconds. Perfect conditions for an ambush. Terrible conditions for survival. Elena moved low, fast, precise. 1 enemy stepped into view. She fired. Drop. Another appeared behind him. She pivoted. Drop. But every time she cleared 1 angle, 2 more replaced it. "Captain," Miller shouted, "they're hurting us." Elena didn't like that word. Hurting. That meant control. That meant intention. She slid behind a rusted container, breathing steady. Then she looked up and saw the truth. Warning, no escape routes. Drones. Silent. Hovering above the storm, barely visible through the snowfall. They weren't just watching. They were mapping movement in real time. Relaying positions. Updating enemy squads instantly. Elena whispered, "Of course." This wasn't a ground ambush. It was a live-controlled kill operation. Someone above was guiding everything. And then, a voice returned on an open channel. Clearer this time. "Closer. You are exactly where we wanted you, Captain." Elena's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" she snapped. A pause. Then, "Someone who remembers you." That sentence hit harder than any bullet. Because it meant one thing. This wasn't random. This was personal. Skull, the first loss. An explosion ripped through the central structure. A massive support beam collapsed. Snow and debris swallowed the area. When the dust cleared, silence. Elena stepped forward slowly. "Report," she shouted. Nothing. Then static. Then a broken transmission. A Miller down. Elena stopped moving. Just for a moment. Not emotional. Not shocked. Focused. Because now the mission had changed. Extraction was no longer the objective. Survival was. And revenge was becoming inevitable. Red circle the break point. Elena raised her weapon again. Her voice dropped low. "Everyone still alive, fall back to my position, now." A pause. Then Lewis' weak voice crackled through. "I'm here." Ramirez followed faintly. "Copy." Barely functional. Barely alive. But alive. Elena exhaled slowly. Good. Because she was done reacting. Now she would start controlling. She looked into the storm. At the drones. At the ruins. At the unseen enemy behind it all. And said quietly, "You wanted me here." A cold smile formed. "Now you're going to regret it." The snowstorm didn't slow down. If anything, it got worse, like the sky itself was trying to erase every trace of what was happening below. Elena Carter moved through the ruins like a shadow that refused to die. Her squad was scattered, communications were broken, and the enemy was still closing in. But something had changed inside her now. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was calculating the hunt back. Regroup in the ghost structure. Elena reached the east structure, an abandoned steel warehouse half-collapsed under years of frost and war damage. The inside was dark, cold, and filled with twisted metal beams hanging like bones. She crouched behind a fallen wall and raised her hand signal. Seconds later, a shape moved through the snow. Private Lewis stumbled in first, clutching his side, breath shaking. Then Specialist Ramirez limping. Both alive. Barely. Elena scanned them instantly. Injuries. Lewis shook his head. Shrapnel, nothing critical, I think. Ramirez looked pale. Comms are dead, Captain, completely jammed. Elena nodded once. She already knew. If comms were dead on their side, but enemy coordination was perfect. That meant one thing. Backhand index pointing right, someone was feeding them real-time intel. And it wasn't from outside. Warning the silence that did belong. A low vibration echoed through the structure. Elena froze instantly. Not gunfire. Not movement. Something deeper. A signal pulse. She looked at Ramirez sharply. Did you just try to reconnect? He shook his head quickly. No, ma'am, I swear. Elena slowly turned her attention toward the snow-covered radio pack on the ground. It was still blinking, even though it was supposed to be dead. That's not ours, she whispered. Lewis frowned. Then what is it? Elena didn't answer immediately, because her instincts were already screaming. Something inside their system had been activated remotely. Not by them. Not by command. By someone else. Skull the first crack in the truth. A sudden voice broke through the static again. Clear. Closer. Too close. You always were difficult to kill, Carter. Elena stood up slowly. Her grip tightened on her rifle. Show yourself, she said calmly. A pause. Then laughter. Not loud. Controlled. Familiar. That's what made it worse. Still giving orders, even when abandoned. Lewis looked at her. Captain, who is that? Elena's expression didn't change. but something in her eyes hardened further. "I don't know," she said. But she wasn't telling the truth. Not fully. Because something about the voice. It wasn't foreign. It was trained. Military. U.S. level. Brain the mission was never about extraction. Elena walked toward the center of the structure, stepping over frozen debris. Her mind was connecting pieces faster now. The interference patterns. The drone coordination. The precision ambush. The targeting of her specifically. She stopped and finally said it out loud. This mission was compromised before we arrived. Ramirez shook his head. Impossible, Command wouldn't. Elena cut him off sharply. Command doesn't deploy teams into blind kill zones without intel, not unless the intel is fake. Silence. That word hung heavy. Fake. Lewis whispered, "You mean we were sent into a trap?" Elena didn't respond immediately. Because now she was thinking deeper. Who benefits from a failed extraction? Who benefits from eliminating an elite unit quietly? And why was she the one being spoken to directly? Then it hit her. Her eyes narrowed. "No," she said slowly. Ramirez frowned. "What?" Elena turned toward the snow outside. Her voice dropped. There was no extraction target. Red circle the ghost objective. Lewis blinked. "What are you talking about?" Elena walked back toward them. "Think," she said sharply. "We never saw the asset, no visual confirmation, no secure intel relay, just coordinates and a time window." Ramirez hesitated. "That's standard blackout protocol." Elena shook her head. "Not like this." She pointed toward the frozen battlefield outside. This wasn't an extraction mission. A pause. Then she said it. It was a purge. The word landed like a bullet. Lewis looked stunned. A purge of what? Elena looked directly at him. Then at Ramirez. Then back toward the battlefield. And said quietly, "Of us." Warning, the enemy speaks again. A sudden burst of static filled the air. Then the voice returned. But this time, it wasn't just directed at Elena. It was broadcast. Everywhere. "Captain Carter, do you understand now?" Elena raised her weapon instantly. "Show yourself." The voice continued calmly. "You were never meant to retrieve anyone." A pause. "You were meant to disappear here." Snow slammed against the broken wall as wind intensified. Lewis stepped back. "Captain, what is this?" Elena didn't look at him. Because she was listening too carefully now. The tone. The structure. The confidence. This wasn't Russian Field Command. This was something else. Something internal. Skull, the name she was afraid to hear. The voice spoke again. And this time, it changed everything. "You always question orders too much, Carter." Elena froze. Just slightly. Not fear. Recognition. Ramirez noticed, "Captain." The voice continued. "That's why they chose you. You were predictable in chaos." Elena exhaled slowly. Her grip tightened until her knuckles turned white. Because she knew now. This wasn't random enemy intelligence. This wasn't Russian command. This was someone who had studied her. Inside her own system. Lewis whispered, "Is that one of ours?" Elena didn't answer immediately. Then finally, "Yes." A long silence. Only snow. Only wind. Only truth settling in like ice. Red circle, the point of no return. Elena turned slowly toward the ruins outside. Her voice became low, controlled, dangerous. "Whoever you are." The voice replied instantly. "You already know." And in that moment, Elena Carter understood the worst part of war. Not the enemy outside, not the bullets, not the ambush, but the fact that sometimes, backhand index pointing right the mission itself is the weapon. She raised her rifle toward the storm and said one final thing. Then I'm coming for you. The storm had fully consumed the battlefield now. There was no sky, no horizon, only white chaos and the sound of war bleeding through the wind. Elena Carter stood inside the broken steel structure, her rifle raised, listening to the silence after the voice disappeared. But she knew one thing for certain now. Silence was not peace. It was preparation. Red circle the moment everything turns final. Lewis was breathing heavily behind her. Captain, what do we do now? Ramirez wiped blood from his forehead. We're cut off. No comms, no extraction, no support. Elena didn't answer immediately. She was watching the snow outside. Watching patterns. Movement. Shadows that didn't belong to nature. Then she said it calmly. We leave. Lewis blinked. Through what route? Elena lowered her weapon slightly. The one they don't expect. Ramirez frowned. They expect all routes, we're boxed in. Elena finally turned to him. That's why we stop thinking like we're boxed in. A pause. Then she tapped her helmet. We think like we're already dead. Warning the enemy tightens the net. Outside, distant movement increased. Drones hummed faintly above the storm. Laser sights flickered across broken walls. They were closing the circle. Slow. Controlled. Certain. Lewis looked out through a crack in the wall. They're surrounding us again. Elena nodded. Yes. Ramirez swallowed. Then we're out of time. Elena stepped forward. No, she corrected. We are exactly on time. She pulled out a compact flare device from her vest. 3 charges. Old school. Untraceable. Lewis stared. What is that going to do against drones and snipers? Elena looked at him. It's not for them. Fire the first break in the storm. She moved fast. Too fast for hesitation. Elena placed the first charge under a fractured steel beam. Second near a fuel storage fragment buried in ice. Third at the northern exit point. Lewis realized instantly, you're going to blow the structure. Elena didn't look at him. Yes. Ramirez stepped forward. That will collapse the entire zone. Elena finally met his eyes. That's the idea. A pause. Then she added, when visibility drops, we move. Bomb the explosion that changed the battlefield. A sharp beep echoed. Then, boom. The first explosion ripped through the structure, sending frozen debris into the air. Snow and metal erupted outward. The drones above instantly shifted position. Confusion. Interference. Visibility dropped. Geo, Elena shouted. The second explosion followed immediately. Boom. The battlefield turned into chaos. Snowstorm plus smoke plus collapsing structures equals total disruption. Enemy targeting systems lost precision. For the first time, the kill box cracked. Person female breakout through fire and ice. Elena moved first. Lewis followed. Ramirez stumbled behind them. They ran through collapsing steel corridors as the structure fell apart around them. Gunfire erupted instantly outside. But now, it was blind. Random. Imprecise. Elena fired twice from the hip. 2 silhouettes dropped in the snow. No hesitation. No pause. Just movement. Stay close, she ordered. Lewis gasped. Where are we going? Elena didn't slow down. Forward, warning the enemy makes its final play. As they burst into the open snowfield, everything stopped for half a second. Then, all drones shifted at once. Red lights aligned. Laser sights converged. Every remaining enemy unit repositioned. They had adapted. Fast. Too fast. Ramires shouted, "They've locked us again." Elena looked up through the storm and saw it. A command drone hovering higher than the rest. Different signal pattern. Stronger encryption. The source. She narrowed her eyes. There. Lewis followed her gaze. That drone. Elena nodded once. That's the controller. Skull the final decision. Elena stopped running. Lewis froze. "Captain, what are you doing?" She raised her rifle. But not at the soldiers. At the drone. Ramires realized instantly, that's out of range. Elena calmly replied, "Not for what I'm about to do." She removed the last remaining charge from her vest. A shaped explosive. Designed for armored targets. Lewis shook his head. "You can't hit that from here." Elena loaded it. Adjusted aim. Then said quietly, "I don't miss." Red circle, one shot, one chance. Wind howled. Snow blinded everything. The drone hovered steady above the chaos. Tracking. Waiting. Calculating. Elena exhaled once. Not fear. Control. Then she fired. Thump. The explosive round cut through the storm like a ghost. For a second. Nothing. Then. Flash boom. The sky lit up. The drone exploded midair. Fragments scattered like burning stars. Every laser sight on the ground flickered. Then died. Complete blackout. Snowflake silence after the storm. The battlefield went quiet. Not peaceful. Just broken. Elena stood still for a moment, breathing heavily. Lewis and Ramires caught up behind her. "No signals," Ramires whispered. "They're blind now." Elena nodded slowly. For a few minutes. Lewis looked around. "Is it over?" Elena didn't answer immediately. She looked toward the horizon. Somewhere beyond the storm. Beyond the frozen ruins. The real enemy was still out there. Finally she said, "No." A pause. Then she added, "This was just the exit. Fire final hook. The escape is not the end." She turned toward the snow-covered landscape. Blood on her gloves. Ice on her armor. Storm behind her. An enemy still somewhere in the white void. Elena Carter tightened her grip on her rifle. Because now she understood the truth fully. Backhand index pointing right, the mission didn't fail. Backhand index pointing right, it was completed. Just not by her side. And whoever set this up was still watching. She took one step forward into the snow. Then another. And said quietly, "If they think I'm dead." A cold breath. They just made their first mistake.